Hello and welcome to Module 6. We have two focuses this week, Show, Don't Tell, and doing a workshop on your complete rough draft. So let's get started. As always, we've got the introduction followed by the module overview, which again is done in feedback's fruit. Be sure that you respond to both questions in order to earn full points. Then we have the reading and resources with required resources. And it's important to note this week that, again, in the textbook, we have readings that were previously assigned, and so the key word here is to review. However, that's assuming that you have previously read these. If you have not, for whatever reason, it's important that you go back now and read them because you're going to need to have this information in order to complete the assignments this week. So take the time to go back and read those if you haven't already. Those readings then are followed by links to specific readings that you will find helpful for both the workshopping and the creative journal assignment that is asking you to focus on show, not tell. The first one, the magic question, getting real feedback you can actually use, is an essay about giving and receiving constructive feedback. It'll help you with the writer's workshop that you'll be doing this week. It's pretty long, um, but it's actually an analogy between doing workshopping and coaching someone in some kind of an activity. Um, I'm sorry, this isn't the long one. It refers back to the magic question, getting real feedback you can actually use. Um, I'm sorry, it refers back to Liz Lerman's critical response process, which we reviewed in a previous video, but there's a link directly to that here if you need to remember what that is about. But this is a really helpful analogy between coaching in general and how we want to approach when we are giving feedback, specifically constructive feedback to our fellow writers. The next one, how to read a poem. Um, Actually, there are two this time that will be helpful in deep reading of poems. First is How to Read a Poem, and then Elizabeth Bishop, The Moose, is also a close reading of a poem. And so with How to Read a Poem, this is from the poets.org webpage, which is an outstanding resource for anything to do with poetry. Um, It walks you through step by step how to read a poem, how to first encounter it, how to look deeper, take a deeper dive into the language, the line breaks, rhythms, things like that. Um, and then as you continue to read, one of the things it suggests is reading a poem out loud, which originally poetry was a speech art where people spoke their poetry rather than it being written down. It only became focused on the page much later. And so poems are generally meant to be heard, not just read on the page. And so there's some information about reading it out loud, things to look at both when hearing and also when you're reading one on the page as far as the lines, etc. Um, and as you continue to scroll down, there are questions that you can ask when you're reading a poem. And these might be helpful to you if you're workshopping someone's poetry in the workshop this week. They can give you some ways to think about what you can comment on in their work. And then there are also two links to some specific poems and then specific um, closer looks at the poems. The first one is The Red Wheelbarrow, which we've already encountered by William Carlos Williams. Um, Gives you some demonstration of how to use the questions as well as doing some thinking about how other poets have looked at this particular poem to give you some ideas about things that you may not have been aware of, different ways to look at the poem. And this is done for two poems, The Red Wheelbarrow as well as Denise Levertov's poem Diving into the Wreck. At the same time, as I mentioned previously, there's a close reading of Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The Moose. And it's not necessary to read the or to look at all three of them, but it's a good idea to look at least a couple of them. The Red Wheelbarrow is a relatively short poem. Denise Levertov's poem is longer. The Moose is longer. Elizabeth Bishop's poem. But by looking at these, you get a better idea of how to read poetry, how to fully benefit from what the writer is trying to accomplish through the use of condensed language, imagery, rhythms, line breaks, choice of language. All those things come into play when you're looking at poetry. And so this class is designed to have you looking at all four of the genres, and poetry is one of those. So you want to, even though you may not be writing poetry yourself, you want to come away from this class with a good understanding of how you can read poetry and provide feedback in a workshop if someone is writing poetry. Then we've got a reading where we have an author reading their work. Kelly Link introduces her ghost boyfriend. This is a recording of a short story that has both the audio link as well as the story itself, the text of it beneath where you click on the link so you can read along. One thing that I found interesting was that her reading doesn't match the transcribed short story exactly, so I don't know which came first. But it's interesting to think about how what we write continues to change based on sometimes on feedback. But this is an opportunity to hear an author read her story, to hear the show don't tell rather than just reading show don't tell. The next one is Scraps, which is a longer piece, and I think you can get you need to be sure and click on PDF full text when you get to the links for that. This is a longer piece, and I don't think that you necessarily need to read the whole piece to get the show don't tell information. This is very descriptive, very filled with the five senses, and it gives you an opportunity to see how a reader is drawn in when you're showing rather than telling about a subject. This writer's experience, what she's describing, she does such a good job of making us feel like we're there with her experiencing this. So again, it's not necessary to read the entire thing to get the benefit of the showing don't tell. And this week has a lot of work, so it's going to be kind of important to you to pick and choose and actually look at all of the links, but you don't necessarily need to read them in their completeness to get what the point is. The next one is a video, and the same is true here. This is a 20-minute video, and first of all, anytime there's a link for something on YouTube, okay, so after you have looked at all the required resources, then you'll be ready to do the first assignment, 6-1, the Student Writers Workshop. And first of all, I need to make you aware that I have sent out a letter or an email on Monday making you aware of the fact that we're doing a workshop this week, and then also providing you with a step-by-step procedure that's more specific than what is in the assignment instructions. So I want to take a few minutes to go over this procedure so that you're very familiar with what it is we're trying to accomplish this week. Okay, so it's 7 steps, and the first step is no later than midnight Thursday. You need to go to the workshop and post your complete rough draft from assignment 5-1 as an attachment. And you do that by clicking on Start a New Thread, then add attachments, then click on Upload. It's important your attachment must be a Word document. It can't be anything else. It has to be a Word document. Then once you've done that, that means your materials are uploaded into the discussion and ready to be workshopped by another student. So number 2, when you're ready to workshop somebody else's rough draft, First of all, you have to download their Word document from their initial post to your computer. And you do that by opening their initial post, their thread, and clicking on the attachment, then downloading it. Number three, the reason you have to download their document is you're going to be using track changes and comments, which are two functions in Word for providing feedback on the downloaded document. If you're not familiar with using those functions, there's a link in the email to a video that will help you understand and learn how to use those functions. Comments simply allows you to make direct comments into the document, showing exactly where you're talking about, and gives you a little text box to type into. Number four, you should mainly be using the comments function to provide specific feedback on where, how, and why things are working well, and where, how, and why things need more work. You shouldn't be using track changes very much at all, because generally track changes is used to make line edits, and we're not editing the document. We're not pointing out or making corrections for the student. So mainly you'll be using the comments function. Number five, you want to use the writer's full workshop checklist to make sure that you have addressed all parts of the review. And I'm going to go to that to show you what I'm talking about. In the assignment instructions for the writer's workshop, under number one, you have the writer's full workshop checklist. And if you open that, it has some information that is the same as the mini workshop, but specifically when we talk about this checklist, this is what is being referred to. And you want to be sure that you're actually doing all of the categories here in the workshop checklist before you complete a review. So you'll notice that there's theme, setting, characters and plot, point of view and tone, elements of strong writing, and ask questions. Then within each of these categories, it asks you to do things, specific things. So for under theme, it asks you to identify one strength, identify one weakness, and make one actionable suggestion for improving the theme. So as long as you do this somewhere in their document, you're in good shape. But you want to make sure that you can put a check mark beside each of the criteria. So you have identified a strength and a weakness, made an actionable suggestion for improvement for each of these, for theme, for setting, for characters and plot, for point of view and tone, and elements of strong writing. And then you're asking questions, and this can be done either as part of your commenting on these criteria, or it can be done in the summary comment that you'll be making as you finish the review and upload it. There is an example of a workshop here underneath the checklist. And one thing I want to draw your attention to, personally, I think it works well to do these in order, but it may not be that that's the way you read it. As long as you can put a check mark beside each of these criteria, you're in good shape. And this example underneath the checklist has the workshopper doing the review not necessarily in order of the way that the checklist is, but it has addressed all of those. And so whatever works for you, as long as you cover all of those criteria, is great. When I get ready to grade your workshop, I'm going to be looking to make sure that you have addressed all the criteria in either your comments on their document or in your summary comment. So read the example, but keep that in mind that it's not in any particular order. It's just making sure that it's addressed all the criteria. So you're using that checklist in number 5. Number 6, when you're done with the review, then you're going to go back and click on the student's initial post, click on Reply to Thread, and upload the reviewed document. And then also type your summary comments in the text box. This should be at least one paragraph. And instead of repeating what you've commented on already in specific locations in the document, this is a good place to summarize your impression of the piece, your overall impression, and ask questions. Those are required And if you haven't already done that in the comments, then you can do that in the summary comments. Ask questions, but they shouldn't be the same kinds of things that you've addressed in the comments where you've been more specific. It should help the writer think in a new way about their piece. Questions that are more global, rather than asking specific things that you've already addressed in the comments on their document, think about other questions that you can ask on the piece overall. And then number 7, repeat this again for a second classmate. So you're just going to go through it again, making sure that you've done all the parts of the criteria and the checklist. Also be aware that this week is very busy. There's a module overview assignment as well as the creative journal. So you're going to need to plan your time wisely. There is a general description of what you do in the workshop here in the instructions, but the specifics are in that email that I'm sending out on Monday. So if for some reason you didn't get the email, let me know and I can resend it. But it's important that you have it. I suggest that you print it out so that you can follow that step-by-step procedure as you're going through your 2 reviews. Remember that you need to post your rough draft by midnight Thursday and then review 2 classmates and re-upload your review and make your summary comments by midnight Sunday. And you also need to look at the grading rubric. Let's open this up completely and move the box around so you can see what I'm talking about. As always, there are criteria listed on the left, and this time there are categories: exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, and not evident. Usually I tell you to read the category on the far left, but this time that is not the category that I want you to read, because exemplary just says basically that you've gone above and beyond proficient. So by reading proficient, that will describe what you want to aim for. For instance, the first criteria is use of the principles for giving constructive creative writing techniques, or critiques, I'm sorry. And under proficient, it says, shows evidence of a thorough reading of the work. Praise is honest and criticism is constructive. Review of work is free of personal bias. So does this describe what you have done in both of your reviews? Check that for each one of the categories. Evaluate strengths and weaknesses. Do you do that for all the criteria? Suggestions for improvement. Do you provide suggestions for improvement that are constructive and actionable? Can they be acted on? Are they specific as to where, why, and how? Comments on the elements of strong writing. Do not do any kind of line editing. We're not looking at spelling, grammar, punctuation. Instead, you're looking at strong writing. What makes the style effective? Is there consistent point of view, etc. And then finally, do you ask questions of the author, either in your comments on their document or in your summary comment? If you don't ask any questions, you can't earn points for that category. And there are 20 points at stake. So be sure that you look at the rubric, make sure that you're doing all the things that will earn you points in the rubric. All right, so that completes the Student Writers Workshop. We have one more assignment for Module 6, and that is a creative journal. However, just to keep you on your toes, this is another creative journal where you're not actually writing a creative work, you're using something that you've already written, and the guidelines and rubric do not match specifically what you're being asked to do in assignment 6-2. They need to update that. This is the first time this particular version of the course has been run, so there are some differences between the guidelines and the rubric in each of the individual each of the creative journals. So for this one, the creative work, you're going to select a section from the draft of your final project, so an excerpt, a paragraph, or if you're doing a poetry, it'll be a stanza or a single section of a dialogue or description if you're working on a screenplay. you're going to pick that, and then you're going to analyze it for showing rather than telling. Um, it's asking you to revise the particular section that you use. So pick an excerpt and then look at it and see if there are ways that you can make the showing not telling stronger. Can you remove adverbs, adjectives? Can you provide more actions that speak rather than listing, telling things about what the person is doing, actually show what they're doing? Um, Once you have picked your excerpt, revised it for showing, not telling, then you're going to answer the reflection questions. Be sure, as always, that you answer all of the questions, and be sure that when it asks for you to use examples from your creative work, explain how you achieved a showing approach. We need examples. We need evidence from the work. Is there a word, phrase, or sentence that you feel works particularly well? Then quote that. You don't have to cite when you quote yourself, but that's what we're looking for here is actual quotes from your excerpt that show you doing this. If you changed from adverbs and adjectives to make way for more active verbs and specific nouns, again, show us where you did that. Show us the before, show us the after by quoting. And then the final question, how do you feel incorporating this literary element or tool has impacted your writing style? Is this something that you weren't doing before? And so now you feel more empowered, that you're more strongly drawing your reader into your writing because you're showing rather than telling. Um, how do you feel differently about your work when you're focusing on whether or not you're showing versus telling? Sometimes that's not what we think about when we first write something, but when you go back and think about that specifically, how does that change your style when you're focused just on that aspect? And again, always take a look at the guidelines and rubric to make sure, again, that you're adapting it to this specific assignment. But that's what I'll have to use. My comments on the grading will reflect what you're actually doing in this assignment rather than sticking to just the guidelines and rubric if they're not applicable. Um, Continue to use the general discussions or the general questions discussion to ask about the assignments. People have been doing that in the last couple of weeks, and I hope that you're reviewing that through the week because often those questions are ones that you probably have too, and that gives me an opportunity to make clarifications, to refer students to particular aspects of the assignment. Um, However, if it's a grading question, if you have a question about a specific grade or you're not sure about something that's more personal, then be sure that you email me instead.